Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at Special Booster 2.5, and Special Booster 2.5 offers us lots of new and powerful tools in order to build and iterate on some new and existing decks. And today's deck I'm going to be taking a look at is going to be one of the newer decks to come out of Special Booster 2.5, and that's going to be Violet and her Ghost Gang. So when it comes to ghosts, they're obviously going to be a purple deck centered around trash and the utilization of the trash. Ghosts as a deck is centered around the new keyword of execute, and execute is actually a really strong keyword doing three main things. The first one is it allows you to attack at the end of your turn, so it works similarly to Blitz and Vortex that way. So if you Digivolve into your Digimon and the memory passes over onto the opponent's side, you're still able to make that attack. Then the second thing is at the end of the attack, you end up deleting this Digimon, which might seem like a bad thing, but as we've learned in the past, deleting your own Digimon and then being able to reset up is an incredibly powerful strategy that this deck is leveraging on. It's leaving Digimon bodies on the field to be interacting with, so it's not as strong as some other self-deleting strategies, but it's still a very strong factor that puts this deck above some others, especially when you combine it with the third factor where your opponent's unsuspended Digimon can also be the target of the attack with this effect, similarly to Raid, essentially making it so no Digimon on the opponent's field is going to be safe. Ghosts has two main ways that you could approach building the deck, at least in my perspective of having the most success, and that's going to be either a pure Ghosts build, which is what this video is going to be covering, or you could get creative and use a lot of the mechanics that Ghosts is playing around with to play a purple hybrid variant of Ghosts. The biggest weakness of the deck is the fact that because we are super reliant on our on-delete effects, we are pretty vulnerable to Ace Digimon because of how Execute works, and we're also pretty vulnerable to alternative removal types that don't delete our Digimon because, well, if we're not getting our Digimon deleted, we don't trigger our on-delete effects, and that ruins and loses us a lot of value put into our Digimon. Then it might also be slower than some of the other top decks in the current environment, both from a consistency standpoint and a pressure and tempo standpoint. But not saying that it's not strong, just saying it's a little bit weaker than some of the other top contending decks. And then the last big thing to note is not all of the ghost cards at this current time are that great, and there's not a lot of ghosts in the game, so that really limits what the archetype can do, hampering the deck's overall ability to adapt for any given environment. But I still think that this is definitely one of the stronger and more appealing looking decks coming out of Special Booster 2.5. So with all that said and done, let's just dive right into the deck profile and see what we're working with. Starting off with the Digitamas, I'm going to be running 4 copies of the brand new BT20 Necromon as the only Digitama because this is one of the best cards in the entire deck because of its on-delete inheritable ability, allowing us to grab from our trash any ghost-traded Digimon and put it into our hand, so that way we're not losing that much, and it can be used in combination with some of our other cards to actually use the card that we're grabbing a little bit more efficiently, making it just one of the best cards for the deck because it also reduces the amount of extra cards that we need to accomplish this similar style of ability. And then when it comes to the level 3s, and I guess this is going to extend to the rest of the deck, the majority of it is just going to be the BT20 cards because we do have 2 full evolution lines that we want to take advantage of because they best support and synergize with the deck. So as far as the rookies go, that means I'm going to be running 4 copies of the BT20 Candlemon because Retaliation is a really good ability to be able to act as removal, so having it on a lower level is really nice, making it easy to use, on top of the fact that its on-delete ability allows us to be able to discard a card from our hand to delete one of the opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon, so we have an alternative way to be able to remove the opponent's Digimon and try to get rid of some of those pesky floodgates that might be locking us out of the game. Then when it comes to the other BT20 rookie, that's going to go to the 4 copies of Ghostmon, acting as the deck's dedicated searcher or digger, looking off the top 3 for our Ghost traded cards and Liberator traded cards, and then the rest go to the bottom, so nothing too fancy there, with a fairly simple but effective inheritable ability of just an on-delete of gaining us 1 memory, which is really nice and why I'm also going to be running 3 copies of the BT14 Gazimon, so I have the consistency on seeing this ability as much as I possibly can, so that way when our Digimon do get deleted, we have a high chance that we're going to be gaining some memory, which could enhance our plays or anti-tempo the opponents. But if you really wanted to, the 3 copies of Gazimon could literally be whatever else you feel like you want to use. It's just the flex spot of the deck, and if you want to run some floodgates, by all means do so. Then when it comes to the level 4s, again, just mostly going to be the BT20 cards, which is going to be 3 copies of the BT20 Soulmon. So this has an on-play and when digivolving ability, where one of our Digimon gains retaliation until the end of the opponent's turn, which, as we saw with Candlemon, is still pretty nice to have for alternative ways of removing the opponent's Digimon, especially if we're pairing it up with the Execute ability. That means we could attack into the opponent's unsuspended Digimon and delete them with retaliation. Then it also has that same inheritable ability as what we just saw with the Candlemon, so again, just more ways to control the opponent's field. And then when it comes to the main level 4 of the deck, that's going to be the 4 copies of the BT20 Bakemon. So this is going to be the deck's Tamer setter, so when we digivolve into this Digimon, we get to have the ability to play a Violet in Boots if we have 1 or fewer Tamers on our field. So the fact that we just have a way to play out our Tamer for free is always really good. Then it has that same inheritable of on delete, gaining a memory, so we could pair this up with the Gazimon, or we could pair this up with the Ghostmon to gain even more memory. Then the last level 4 is, again, another tech or flex spot. It could literally be just whatever you feel like you want it to be, but because I am sticking on theme with the ghosts for this build, I'm just going to be running the next best level 4 ghost, which is going to be the BT15 version of Bakemon, because it has a when digivolving and on delete effect, where we get to draw 1 and discard 1, so cycling is never a bad thing to increase the overall consistency of the deck, on top of having the inheritable ability of retaliation, so that way we have more ways to be able to use and have access at this ability. Then when it comes to the level 5s, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Metal Phantomon. So this can digivolve on top of a base Phantomon because it is an X-Antibody Digimon. So you could also think about dipping a little bit into some X-Antibody synergy cards if you really wanted to. But this card is still just really good for this deck because it allows us to have a decent blocker. So we have some defensive plays, and if our blocker gets deleted, then we get to start triggering all of our on-delete effects. But he himself has a nice on-play and when digivolving ability to delete one of our Digimon, to delete one of the opponent's level 5 or lower Digimon, so just more removal types and more ways to trigger our on-delete effects. Then he also has an on-delete effect as an inheritable himself, where we get to de-digivolve 1 on one of the opponent's Digimon, which is really good form of soft removal to try to counter various different strategies. Then when it comes to the main level 5 of the deck, that's going to go to the 4 copies of Phantomon. So Phantomon has that execute keyword that I already kind of explained earlier, so it's just an early way to be able to start executing, on top of the fact that it has an on-delete ability himself, where we get to play out a level 4 or lower Digimon with Ghost in its traits from our trash for free, which is really powerful because we could use literally the Digimon that's underneath him or toolbox it for whatever other ghosts are in our trash. Then on top of that, his inheritable ability is basically a copy of his native on-delete ability, so whether we're using him to execute or at higher stages, it doesn't matter, we're just always going to have a relatively sticky board presence because of what Phantomon does. Then when it comes to the level 6s, again, because there's not really a lot of ghost traded Digimon, I'm just running more BT20 cards. So the off mega is going to be 2 copies of BT20 Reapermon, which is another pretty fantastic card because he comes with some very powerful keywords in the form of collision and blocker, so he could attack and force them to block, or he could block himself. So already good utility there, especially if we combine it with something like retail, then he becomes extra dangerous. Then on top of that, he's also a really good anti-ace tool, because during all turns, once per turn, when an effect digivolves your opponent's Digimon, we get a de-digivolve 1, so essentially undoing the digivolution that they just did. Then he himself has an on-delete ability where we get to delete one of the opponent's 4 play cost or lower Digimon or Tamers, even adding in some Tamer removal. Then on top of that, the main level 6 of the deck is going to go to the big boss monster himself, which is the 4 copies of Necromon we're going to be playing with. So he himself has security attack +1 and execute. So essentially, if you're not executing, you're just punching the opponent's security pretty hard. And he even has an on-play and when digivolving ability to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with the lowest level. So we want to try to remove everything else from the opponent's field, and then when we go into Necromon, obviously delete kind of just what's left over. Then his secondary ability, which is an on-play and on-delete ability, allows us to play a level 5 or lower ghost traded Digimon from our trash for free. So if we combine this with Phantomon, we essentially get to play 2 Digimon out from this Digimon being deleted due to execute, which means we most likely removed the opponent's Digimon. So he's just a very powerful control card, or just an aggro card when there's nothing to control. And then when it comes to the Tamers, I'm just again trying to keep things as simple as possible and make things as streamlined, running mostly Violets, but I am going to be running 4 copies of Analog Youth because for all intents and purposes, this card is basically an honorary purple tamer, but for this deck more specifically compared to a lot of other decks, it does have the actual added upside on allowing us to use its secondary ability. So not only is it just a really low play costed tamer, but the on-play effect allows us to make the deck even more consistent while filling up the trash at the same time. And then on top of that, like I kind of alluded to before, the secondary ability, which happens during all turns, is really insane for this deck, because when one of our level 5 or higher Digimon with a Digivolution source is deleted, we get to suspend this tamer, and if we do, gain a memory and hatch a Digi-Egg into an empty space in our raising area. So we combine this with our execute cards, and boom, we have an easy way to be able to trigger this ability ourselves to increase the overall pressure that we could put on the opponent. Then when it comes to the Violets, I'm going to be running 2 copies of the BT18 Violet. She's not in particularly that great, but she is a memory setting tamer, and those are always helpful, making sure that we're not really memory choked. And on top of that, she's adding some overall consistency to the deck, because at the start of our main phase, we get to discard an option card or card with Ghost or 3 Musketeers in its traits to be able to draw a card, so it helps filter through our deck as much as possible. Then when it comes to the main tamer of the deck, the one that we actually are going to be using more often than not, is going to be the 4 copies of the BT20 Violet in Boots. So she is obviously going to be the 3-drop counterpart, which means that she's going to allow us to gain a memory as long as the opponent has a Digimon on their field at the start of our main phase. And then on top of that, her secondary ability is absolutely insane for what this deck does, because during your turn, when any of your ghost traded Digimon are deleted, we get to suspend this tamer, and then one of our Digimon can digivolve into a Digimon with Ghost in its traits from our hand, with the Digivolution cost being reduced by 2. So essentially, the whole idea is we're going to go up into Necromon, swing with our Necromon with Execute, have himself get deleted, which would then spit out 2 bodies, and trigger our egg to be able to grab back either our level 5 or 6 back into our hand, which then lines up us to be able to use Violet's ability to go right back into them. So she's just a really big combo enabler to make sure that we could end off on some really strong board states. And then when it comes to the options, I'm keeping it pretty slim and trim just because I'm heavier on the overall tamers. If you really wanted to, or it's outside of your budget, you could cut the analog for some various other memory boosts or scrambles. But when it actually comes to the options that you're going to be playing, that's going to go to the 4 copies of Wisdom Training, because There's no real reason not to run Wisdom Training. It's one of the best and cheapest consistency tools while helping with the overall tempo later when we need to go up into a big power play. And then when it comes to the other option, that's going to be 2 copies of Apparition Legion. So this is a pretty unique option because we get to return up to 9 levels worth of Digimon from the opponent's trash to their deck. So it's actual grave hate, but the added bonus is then we get to play out a ghost traded Digimon for each returned card's level from our trash for free. Then the Digimon that's played off of this effect gain rush and blocker until the end of the opponent's turn, which is pretty decent because obviously we want to play out Necromon off of this ability, returning a level 6 and a level 3 out of the opponent's trash, but we could kind of mix and match and choose whatever we want depending on what the matchup is, which is really nice. But the fact that we're always playing out a Digimon and we could use it in various different offensive or defensive ways is really powerful, especially since the security ability at least is still allowing us to play a level 5 or lower ghost traded Digimon from our trash for free, so it just allows us to have an extra body to then be able to use for whatever we want, assuming the opponent doesn't remove it. But yeah, for the most part, that's going to be it for the more tried and true classic build. I don't really see that much innovation or deviation off of this when it comes to unique and spicy tech. The majority of the deck, as I kind of already mentioned before, is just going to be the BT20 cards because those are some really good cards on top of some generic staples that most purple decks at this point are going to be running. And then as far as the alternative build, this is kind of a work in progress, but the idea in concept is there on being able to utilize the fact that purple hybrid cards want to have themselves be deleted or find a way for them to be deleted while applying lots of pressure on the opponent, which fits in naturally with how Ghosts wants to play. So you could kind of combine the two based on the mechanical identity of what they're doing. And then when it comes to some other useful cards, there are just a lot of various different tech and tools that we could include, not only just from some other generic staples, but other cards that help support ghosts, some self-deletion synergy, ways to fill up the trash, and various other purple cards that are just generically good. And then when it comes to some future potential support, right now we have no confirmation on any direct support, but this being a Liberator deck means that there's a high chance that it's going to end up getting some support down the line, especially since it's also working with a pretty generic trait that hasn't really been that supported. So whenever we get more ghosts, that's going to be a good time to relook and revisit what this deck is able to do with it. On top of the fact that we still could potentially use any other good generic purple tools that are coming out in the meantime. But that's all I really have for this deck profile. Feel free to tell me your thoughts about it down in the comments below. And while you're down there, you might as well leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date when I upload or go live with any of my content. And with that, I hope to see everyone in the next video.